This is the historical event we've learned about every year in grade school. But with fresh eyes, when we take a step back and look at the Great Depression of the 1930s, we can really see the grand scope of the situation. Life was unpredictable in the worst way for millions. And in a time of hardship, people craved escape. And the entertainment industry delivered, literally and figuratively. Think precision choreography, witty banter, electric visuals on screen. Music, movies, and performances weren't just entertainment. They were events. This decade is remembered as the golden age of entertainment for a reason. There's also millions of problems within that, but yeah. People are super obsessed with the 1920s. It had champagne, flappers, game-changing fashion, but the 30s deserves its flowers too. The 30s aesthetic was fluid, elegant, and still bold and eye-catching. Exactly what the main character, who knew she was that girl, would wear. But how did this happen exactly? How come in the worst economic crisis America has ever seen, created fashion that was more camera-ready and awe-inspiring than ever? It's time to go back to the Kit Kitteridge era. We're going to look into what created 1930s fashion. So now, let's get started. After the catastrophic stock market crash on October 24, 1929, life was changed overnight. Banks collapsed, life savings vanished, wage income plummeted, and pay raises became a myth people used to believe in. By 1933, 25% of the total workforce were unemployed. On top of everything, nature had to make things even more difficult. From 1930 to 1936, the Dust Bowl destroyed the Great Plains and some parts of Canada, pelting farms with dust, ruining crops, and making people sick. Hundreds of thousands left the Midwest for California, the land of milk and honey. But things weren't all bad. People didn't stop enjoying life. It just looked different. While the 1920s were fascinated with bustling city life, the 30s turned to the heartland. American regionalism was a realist art movement that depicted small-town rural life, with an underlying message of resilience and appreciating the little things. The most famous regionalist painting was American Gothic in 1930. Through the Federal Art Project, the WPA also funded murals that brought art into public spaces, celebrating everyday American life. These were created with the intention of keeping artists employed. The biggest appeal of this type of art was that it was safe. When things felt unstable, familiarity became comforting, and risk stopped feeling fashionable. The rebellious energy of the 1920s gave way to a culture that favored wholesomeness. One of the most iconic actresses of the 30s was Shirley Temple, a literal 6-year-old. Franklin D. Roosevelt even said, "As long as our country has Shirley Temple, we will be all right." She sang about animal crackers in her soup. The commercial break memories. Jazz music used to be shocking and provocative, but was rebranded into the more polished, commercial sound of swing and big band music. Cartoons were still in their experimental era, with Disney especially releasing crowd-pleasing shorts, where all the characters looked like that balloon car store guy. Betty Boop, the main cartoon girl, offered nostalgia for the carefree jazz age. She was cheeky, but she deliberately wasn't too rebellious. It didn't matter though, she was so aesthetic either way. Flapper culture all but vanished. There was no room to be a spontaneous, luxury-seeking girl anymore. It was time to be a responsible, reliable, feminine woman. Even with the economy in shambles, the ideal of male breadwinners and female homemakers made a strong comeback, and it was a big selling point. Advertisers promised women that if they use their product to make a delectable meal, then their husband will stay at home. Where was he going before? Instructional films made the expectations even clearer, with titles like Clothes That Men Like and How to Undress for Your Husband, though the latter one was a joke. One of the biggest reflections of a safer, more restrained culture was the shift in women's fashion ideals. Hemlines got longer, and silhouettes got more fitted. Fashion moved towards elegance. The daily 1930s uniform often included gloves and a sensible hat, with the goal of looking as classy as possible. In the 1920s, Joan Crawford was a flapper. In the 1930s, she was sophisticated and regal. On set. Speaking of which, in the midst of instability and headaches, Hollywood was the visual aspirin. People needed escapism, and tickets were cheap. It's hard to argue against that. People still can't get over this period in cinema. Film historians point to 1939 as the best year in Hollywood history. I'm not sure if I agree with that. But in movie world, glamour wasn't seen as indulgent, but radical. Movies promised awe and inspiration, one silk gown and marble staircase at a time. Hollywood in the 30s embraced everything lush, luxurious, and exciting. Stars ballroom danced their hearts out. Guys wore penguin tuxedos. People saw the most gorgeous loungewear you'll ever see. Lovers were framed in soft focus lighting. Marlene Dietrich wore a tuxedo and kissed a girl. Romance of the decade. Even as American culture romanticized the heartland, it was equally obsessed with luxury. During the Great Depression, the rich stayed rich, and some people gained wealth. Was the glamour obsession a way to show off? I think so. Art Deco remained firmly in vogue, and this wave of elegance was perfectly captured in the work of Tamara de Lempicka, whose paintings idealized the lives of aristocrats and the ultra-wealthy. The mood was sophisticated, confident, and just a little aloof. And in this la-di-da atmosphere, movie stars were more massive than ever. Just hearing names like Cary Grant, Greta Garbo, Fred Astaire, Jean Harlow sparked excitement, and their mystique thrived on distance. Remember that there was no social media, no 24-hour news cycle, celebrity tabloids weren't a thing yet, aside from PR-approved fan magazines. Hollywood didn't only promote stars. They were crafted as idyllic mythological figures. They were effortlessly polished and camera-ready. They never stuttered. They were witty and always had the right thing to say. Stars wore the most glamorous clothes, and even when they didn't, they were still the biggest style influencers. Clark Gable didn't wear an undershirt, for it happened one night, and coincidentally, undershirt sales declined. With the blend of glamour and frugality, the 30s marked the moment American fashion stepped out of Paris's shadow. Of course, there were still European couture influences, but style was increasingly shaped by Hollywood, and given the circumstances, by practicality. Fashion may have been more limited than in the 20s, but that didn't mean you couldn't have fun with personal style. And with that, let's explore the aspirational and everyday fashion of the 1930s. The bias cut. This is the trademark look of the decade. Fashion designer Madeleine Vionnet innovated the bias cut in the 1920s. The design was created by cutting cloth diagonally, creating a floor-length hourglass effect. It appears to take some Grecian inspirations, noted by photographer Cécile Beton. Women dressed by her were like moving sculptures. These dresses were form-fitting, no flapper, dropped waist looks here, symbolizing the return of femininity in fashion. These dresses moved like water, clung without too much corsetry, and photographed beautifully under soft Hollywood lighting. Especially with the backless look, the bias cut was considered sexy, but was still refined and palatable. The bias cut captured the ultimate 1930s fantasy, luxury that felt effortless, disciplined, and out of reach. Brooches and statement pins. During the Great Depression, accessories became the shortcut to looking chic. Manufacturing made it cheaper to produce intricate pins, and unlike fine jewelry, brooches were worn across class lines. One pin could completely change an outfit, turning the same dress into something new. Shoe clips followed the same logic. One pair of shoes, endlessly refreshed. Even Snow White wore shoe clips. Finger waves. Josephine Baker brought finger waves to mainstream public fruition in the 1920s, and compared to Louise Brooks-style bobs, finger waves felt softer, glossier, and far more controlled, perfectly aligned with the decade's preference for elegance over edge. This hairstyle was sculpted and set into place, emphasizing polish and restraint. This style looked very similar to Marcel waves, but the latter was achieved with a specific curling iron. Due to the influence of movie stars, this was a highly requested hairstyle in salons. Dracula's brides had no contact with society, and they still had finger waves. Knitwear. The Great Depression needed clothing that was affordable, durable, and versatile, and knitwear delivered. It was comfortable enough for everyday life, and was able to follow the decade's preferred silhouette, and aligned with the growing influence of sportswear, prioritizing ease and functionality. Hat veils. Fishnet veils that covered the eyes or entire face was a micro-trend in the 1910s, but reached peak allure in 1932, where Marlene Dietrich wore one in Shanghai Express. Her character was detached, unreadable, and dangerously magnetic.
Don't you find respectable people terribly dull?
And hat veils quickly became shorthand for mystery and seduction. If dark femininity, siren advice existed in the 30s, it probably did, there would definitely be recommendations to enchant your crush by wearing a hat veil. In an era where hats were mandatory, veils were the twist. They turned everyday etiquette into something quietly provocative. Perfect for a decade that wanted controlled excitement. Animal print. Animal print rose in popularity after the release of Tarzan the Ape Man, a movie that was considered spicy for the time. The look quietly became associated with confidence, danger, and escapist fantasy. 1930s Hollywood was fascinated with so-called exotic lands that promised adventure compared to slow-moving daily life. Animal print was a wearable extension of that fantasy. Once reserved for royalty, it became accessible for everyday consumers through prints and trims rather than real fur. The fur industry also sharply declined in the Great Depression, so animal print stepped in as a daring modern stand-in. Peroxide. This is the point where American women started dyeing their hair en masse. The face of this trend was Jean Harlow, made over by legendary beautician Max Factor, from an ashy blonde to a striking, near-white platinum. Celebrity stylist Alfred Pagano later admitted, "I used to bleach your hair and made it platinum blonde. We used peroxide, ammonia, Clorox, and Lux Flakes. Can you believe that?" For the 30s, I can. With Harlow being typecasted in bombshell roles, especially 1931's Platinum Blonde, ultralight hair became a new symbol of modern allure. As other Hollywood stars followed suit, peroxide sales surged, and salons rushed to offer bleaching services. It was another way to look trendy without spending couture money. Never mind that this process was potentially damaging for any hair type. Satin. With its luminous sheen and fluid drape, satin was made for the camera. It photographed beautifully, creating elegant, slinky silhouettes that moved far away from the straight-line shapes of the 1920s, and contrasted the era's economic hardship. Satin could be used for everything: cocktail dresses, evening gowns, even glamorous loungewear. And just as important, it was practical. Satin clothing offered little fabric, allowing designers to present refinement without excess. And with the rise of rayon satin, the look became widely accessible, offering the Hollywood look at a fraction of the cost of silk. Bouffant shoulders. This was another example of 1930s fashion shifting towards softer, more romantic silhouettes. The trend was kicked off by the Letty Linton dress, worn by Joan Crawford in the 1932 film of the same name, designed by Adrian. Crawford played a wealthy socialite, and the dress, more famous than the movie itself, became a cultural event. Edith Head later called it the single most important influence on fashion in film history. This movie and dress is credited for making Joan Crawford a star, and soon other starlets had to have their own bouffant shoulder moment. Full puffed shoulders added drama and confidence, while visually narrowing the waist, reinforcing the decade's return to an hourglass shape. Bows. Bows returned to fashion in 1927 by Elsa Schiaparelli, whose knitwear collection featured a bow directly knitted at the neckline. And in the 1930s, Katharine Hepburn and Marlene Dietrich embraced bow ties, usually silk or bedazzled. Bows were oversized, sculptural, and often used to soften sharp tailoring and angular silhouettes, strategically placed at the neck, waist, or shoulder. This era was all about ornamentation, so this was a way to look bold while still embodying romantic femininity. Pajama pants. This decade started opening the doors for women in pants. Pajama pants emerged as swimsuit cover-ups on the beaches of the French Riviera. It drew inspiration from local laborers, sailors, fishermen, mechanics, and was filtered through a very wealthy lens. Pajama pants became a resort symbol of leisure and privilege, relaxed but still opulent. There's a reason most of these pants were made out of silk. These pants were quite scandalous in their own right. As the New York Times declares, anything that faintly suggests the boudoir is taboo. Even as 1930s fashion leaned towards traditional femininity, pajama pants offered something modern and non-restrictive. Tennis fashion. Tennis is one of the quiet status symbols, as it was associated with preppy, old-money leisure. And similarly to knitwear, this trend matched the rise of practicality and a more active lifestyle. Business casual. The term didn't exist yet, but the concept absolutely did. As more women worked white-collar jobs, something needed to be practical enough for long days, yet feminine and respectable enough to signal competence. If you had a job like typing or secretarying, then you were in a safer position in the job market. But still, nothing was guaranteed. When securing an office job, the strategy was to look your best. And much like the economic moment demanded, this style was versatile. Sparkles. How much more Hollywood glam can you get? Shiny adornments have been a part of evening wear since the 1920s, but in the 30s, sparkle became more refined and intentional. It caught light dramatically, made movement eye-catching, and added texture without using too much fabric. Sparkles weren't just decorative, they sold fantasy. They represented beauty, hope, and the quiet belief that maybe everything would turn out okay. They were typically created with a gelatin colored with lead paint. It seemed like a good idea at the time. And they could melt if they got too warm, so I don't think a lot of these movie dresses survived studio lights. As rough as the Great Depression was, things couldn't stay too horrible for too long. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced a sweeping set of policies known as the New Deal. Banks were stabilized, programs like Works Progress Administration employed millions, and the Social Security Act introduced retirement benefits and unemployed insurance for the first time. By 1938, the economy started showing real signs of recovery. For a moment, it looked like things were finally settling, but history had other plans. If people thought the Great Depression changed everyday life, that was just the beginning. We're going to look into the 1940s for the next episode of the series. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye!